Verified department records. Genuine field evidence. Unbiased justice. Welcome to Bodycam Incident Reports.
Stop right there! Hands behind your head, now!
This is my home!
I'm the homeowner. My ID's in my purse. Tell me what law you think I broke. Don't reach for anything. Turn around, now.
I am complying. You are detaining me without...
State your badge number. Stop resisting!
You taught me on my own...
The cicadas were humming their rhythmic evening song in the upscale subdivision of Willow Creek, a sound that usually signaled peace and the end of a long day. But for Federal Circuit Judge Evelyn Vance, that sound was drowned out by the adrenaline pounding in her ears. Standing on the mahogany porch of her own colonial-style home, clutching her leather briefcase and house keys, she watched the flashing blue and red lights bounce off the manicured hedges. She looked into the eyes of the man shouting at her, a young, pale officer with a buzz cut who couldn't have been more than 22 years old. His hand was hovering dangerously close to his holster. What Officer Kyle Miller didn't realize was that the trembling woman in the navy blue skirt suit wasn't shaking from fear, although fear was certainly present. She was shaking from a suppressed volcanic rage. He had just made the single most catastrophic miscalculation of his short 3-month career. He had mistaken the stillness of a predator for the submission of prey. Evelyn Vance was 58 years old. She was the first black woman appointed to the federal circuit in her district. Her nickname in the legal community was the Iron Gavel. She had spent 30 years dissecting lies, analyzing evidence, and handing down sentences to drug lords, corrupt politicians, and white-collar criminals. She was known for an intellect that was razor-sharp and a temperament that was unshakable. Defense attorneys advised their clients to plea bargain rather than face her scrutiny if their case was weak. She had built a life on the pillars of justice, truth, and the meticulous application of the law. That Thursday evening, Judge Vance was returning from a late session at the courthouse. She had been reviewing an appeal regarding a complex environmental lawsuit. Her mind was tired, occupied with precedents and statutes. She had pulled her Mercedes into her driveway, gathered her things, and walked up the path she had walked thousands of times. The motion sensor lights of her home had flickered on, illuminating her face as she fumbled for her keys. That was when Officer Miller's patrol car screeched to a halt at the curb. Officer Kyle Miller was a rookie. He was the son of a retired precinct captain, a legacy hire who believed the badge on his chest granted him an authority that superseded the Constitution. He had spent his first 90 days on the force hunting for excitement, eager to prove he was a real cop in a precinct that covered mostly quiet, affluent suburbs. To Miller, the world was binary sheep and wolves, and when he saw a black woman standing at the door of a $2 million home in a predominantly white neighborhood at 9:00 p.m., his biases filled in the narrative before his brain could process the facts. He didn't see a homeowner. He saw a burglar. He saw a threat. "Officer," Evelyn said, her voice dropping an octave, finding that steely resonance that had silenced unruly courtrooms for decades. "My name is Judge Evelyn Vance. I own this property. My identification is in my purse. If you will allow me to—" "Don't you move!" Miller screamed, his voice cracking slightly. He was escalating. He was terrified, but his training told him that fear was weakness, so he converted it into aggression. He rushed up the walkway, closing the distance between them. "I said hands behind your head. You are failing to comply." This is where the narrative shifts from a misunderstanding to a tragedy of civil liberties. Because Evelyn Vance did comply. She recognized the look in his eyes, the glazed tunnel vision intensity that often preceded a fatal error. She slowly placed her keys on the porch mat. She slowly raised her hands. She interlaced her fingers behind her head. "I am complying," she stated clearly, speaking not just to him, but to the Ring doorbell camera mounted 3 feet away. The tiny blue light was solid. It was recording. "I am unarmed. I am on my own property. You have no probable cause for this detention." Miller reached her, breathing heavily. He didn't ask her name again. He didn't check the house number against a dispatch call because there was no dispatch call. He had self-initiated this stop. Rough hands grabbed Evelyn's wrists. He spun her around with unnecessary force, slamming her shoulder against the solid wood of her front door. The impact knocked the wind out of her. "Stop resisting," Miller yelled, though she hadn't moved a muscle. "I am not resisting," Evelyn said, wincing as the cold steel of the handcuffs bit into her skin. "You are hurting me. I have a rotator cuff injury on my right shoulder. Please be careful." "You should have thought about that before you tried to break into a house," Miller sneered. He tightened the cuffs until they clicked to their smallest setting, pinching the delicate skin of her wrists. He then began a pat-down search that was aggressive and humiliating. He patted down her sides, her legs, her chest. "Officer," Evelyn said, closing her eyes, forcing her heart rate to slow down. "You are currently violating the Fourth Amendment. You have no reasonable suspicion that a crime has been committed. I am asking you to check my identification in my purse, which is at my feet." "I'll check what I want to check when I want to check it," Miller retorted. He kicked her legs apart wider. "We've had reports of break-ins in this area. You fit the description." "What description?" Evelyn asked calmly. "A middle-aged woman in a Brooks Brothers suit, or simply a black person in Willow Creek, calm?" "Shut up," Miller snapped. He grabbed her by the arm and marched her down the porch steps toward his cruiser. He didn't put her in the back immediately. Instead, he made her stand by the hood of the car, illuminated by the harsh spotlight exposed to the neighbors who were now peering out from behind their curtains. Miller then returned to the porch to retrieve her purse. He didn't carefully look for ID. He turned the expensive leather bag upside down and dumped the contents onto the porch mat. Lipstick, a phone, a wallet, a heavy set of keys, and a leather portfolio spilled out. He picked up the wallet. He flipped it open. He stared at the driver's license. The address matched the house. The name was Evelyn Vance. But then he saw the other item, the leather portfolio. He opened it and saw the gold shield. Federal Judge, United States Court of Appeals. Officer Miller froze. For a brief second, sanity tried to claw its way into his brain. He looked at the ID. He looked at the woman in handcuffs by his car. The math was simple. He had made a mistake. A massive, career-ending mistake. But here is the insidious nature of unchecked power combined with fragile ego. Instead of apologizing, instead of immediately unlocking the cuffs and begging for forgiveness, Miller's mind performed a frantic gymnastic routine to protect his reality. She can't be a judge, he told himself. Judges are old white men. She's lying. This is fake. She stole this. He walked back down the path, holding the badge. "Where did you get this?" he demanded, waving the credentials in her face. Evelyn stared at him, her expression hardening into absolute zero. "It was issued to me by the Administrative Office of the United States Courts when I was confirmed by the Senate." "It looks fake," Miller scoffed. "And this ID, you probably printed this off the internet. People like you don't live in houses like this." "People like me," Evelyn repeated softly. "Officer, I am going to give you one chance to de-escalate this situation. Call your supervisor, now." "I'm way ahead of you," Miller said. He keyed his radio. "Dispatch, I have a suspect in custody. Possible 459 burglary. Suspect is uncooperative and in possession of forged federal credentials. Requesting a supervisor." Evelyn waited. She stood in the cool night air, her wrists throbbing her shoulder, aching, humiliated in front of her neighbors. But beneath the pain, her legal mind was assembling a dossier. She was memorizing his badge number. She was noting the time. She was cataloging every procedural error failure to articulate suspicion, excessive force failure to Mirandize unlawful search and seizure. 10 minutes later, a second cruiser pulled up. Sergeant Frank Brody stepped out. Brody was a 20-year veteran, a man who had survived multiple internal affairs investigations by knowing exactly how to write a report that justified the unjustifiable. He walked over to Miller, who was standing guard over Evelyn with his hand resting on his taser. "What do we got, rookie?" Brody asked, chewing on a toothpick. "Caught her trying to enter the front door," Miller said, puffing out his chest. "Claimed she lived here. ID looks fake. Found this badge on her, obviously a prop or stolen. She got aggressive when I approached." Brody took the badge from Miller. He shined his flashlight on it. He felt the weight of the leather case, the raised lettering of the seal. He looked at the photo ID. Then he shined his light on Evelyn's face. Brody knew who she was. He had testified in her courtroom 3 years ago. He had seen her tear a prosecutor apart for withholding evidence. The color drained from Brody's face so fast it looked like he had suffered a cardiac event. He turned to Miller and whispered a sound like a hiss of escaping steam. "You idiot. Do you know who this is?" "She's a suspect," Miller stammered, sensing the shift in the atmosphere. "That is Judge Evelyn Vance," Brody hissed. "She is a federal circuit judge. She puts people away for life, Miller. She doesn't break into houses. She owns this house." Brody immediately holstered his flashlight and approached Evelyn, his posture shifting from authoritative to groveling. "Your Honor," he said, his voice trembling slightly, "I am so incredibly sorry. There has been a terrible misunderstanding. Miller, get the cuffs off her now." Miller looked confused, but he obeyed. He fumbled with the key, his hands shaking as the reality of what he had done began to sink in. The cuffs clicked open. Evelyn brought her hands forward, rubbing the deep red indentations on her wrists. She didn't say a word. She simply stared at Brody. "Your Honor." Brody continued, sweating profusely. "Officer Miller is new. He was just trying to be proactive. We've had some break-ins nearby. He made a mistake. We're going to let you go immediately. No harm, no foul, right? We can just put this behind us." Evelyn looked at the two men. She looked at Miller, who was now staring at his boots, looking like a pouting child rather than a law enforcement officer. She looked at Brody, who was trying to smooth over a civil rights violation with a good old boy smile. "No harm?" Evelyn asked, her voice cutting through the night air. She held up her wrists. "I am bleeding, Sergeant. My shoulder is injured. I was handcuffed on my own property. I was racially profiled. I was assaulted." "We can handle this internally," Brody pleaded. "I'll write him up. I'll make sure he gets retrained. There's no need to make this a thing." "It is already a thing, Sergeant," Evelyn said. She reached into her pocket, which Miller had failed to check properly, and pulled out her phone. "I have been recording audio since Officer Miller approached me. My doorbell camera has recorded video of the entire encounter, and I see my neighbor Mrs. Gable recording from her window across the street." Brody looked around, panic setting in. "I want your badge numbers," Evelyn said calmly. "I want the incident report number, and I want you to leave my property immediately." "Your Honor, please." Brody tried one last time. "Leave," Evelyn commanded. It wasn't a request, it was an order from the bench. The officers retreated. As they drove away, Evelyn didn't go inside immediately. She sat on her porch steps and allowed herself to cry for exactly 60 seconds. She let the humiliation and the fear wash over her. Then she wiped her face, stood up, and went to work. She called her husband Marcus, a prominent neurosurgeon who was at a medical conference. He wanted to fly home immediately, his voice thick with rage. She told him to stay. She needed to focus, and his anger, while valid, would be a distraction. Next, she called her personal physician to document her injuries. Then she called Sarah Jenkins, the fiercest civil rights litigator in the state. "Evelyn," Sarah answered, surprised by the late call. "Everything okay?" "No," Evelyn said, walking into her study and booting up her secure laptop. "I need you to clear your schedule. We are going to war." The next morning, Evelyn Vance didn't go to the courthouse. She went to the urgent care center, where a doctor documented the bruising on her wrists and the strain in her rotator cuff. Photographs were taken. A medical report was generated. By noon, she was sitting in her living room with Sarah Jenkins watching the footage from her Ring camera. It was damning. The video clearly showed Evelyn standing calmly unlocking her door. It showed Miller's aggressive approach. It captured the audio perfectly. "People like you don't live in houses like this." "He actually said that," Sarah asked, her jaw tight. "He said the quiet part out loud." "He did," Evelyn said. "But Sarah, I don't just want to sue him. If we just sue him, the city settles, he gets a slap on the wrist, maybe moves to a different precinct. I want to know why he felt comfortable doing this. I want the supervisor. I want the training logs. I want the emails." Evelyn spent the weekend doing what she did best, researching. She used her access to public databases to dig into Officer Kyle Miller. She found his social media profiles. They were scrubbed, but not well enough. Using the Wayback Machine and cached pages, she found posts from his college days, memes, joking about police brutality rants about thugs taking over cities, photos of him posing with a Blue Lives Matter flag while making white power hand signs. But the real gold mine was Sergeant Brody. Evelyn reached out to her network of public defenders and legal aid attorneys. She asked a simple question. Have you had clients complain about Sergeant Frank Brody? The emails poured in. Dozens of stories. Young black men stopped for suspicious walking. Hispanic women harassed during traffic stops. In every case, Brody had been the supervisor who arrived on scene, intimidated the victims into not filing complaints, or wrote reports that completely fabricated events to justify the officer's actions. On Monday morning, Evelyn made a phone call to the United States Attorney for the district, David Sterling. They had gone to law school together. Evelyn, David said warmly, to what do I owe the pleasure? David, I'm sending you a package via courier, Evelyn said. It contains video evidence of a federal civil rights violation committed against a sitting federal judge. It also contains evidence of a conspiracy to obstruct justice by a ranking sergeant. There was a silence on the line. Are you okay? I am motivated, Evelyn said. I want a federal investigation. I don't trust the local internal affairs. They answer to the chief, and the chief answers to the mayor. I want the FBI. If the evidence is what you say it is, David said, his tone shifting to professional gravity, you'll have agents there by this afternoon. The FBI investigation was swift and ruthless. Agent Laura Ruiz, a veteran of the Civil Rights Division, took the lead. When she watched the Ring doorbell footage, she visibly recoiled. The juxtaposition of Judge Vance's calm legal precision against Officer Miller's unhinged aggression was striking. But the real breakthrough came when Agent Ruiz subpoenaed the internal communications of the police department. They seized Miller's personal cell phone, which he had used to text Brody immediately after the incident. Text from Miller to Brody, 9:45 p.m. Sarge, I messed up bad. It's that judge. But she was acting shady. Had to be done. Text from Brody to Miller, 9:47 p.m. Don't say anything to anyone. Write the report saying she matched the description of the B&E suspect from last week. Say she made a furtive movement toward her purse. We kill this. Text from Miller to fellow rookie, 10:15 p.m. Man, I hate this PC crap. She thinks because she's got a robe she's untouchable. Should have tased her just to watch her drop. Agent Ruiz sat back in her chair. That last text wasn't just bias, it was malice. It proved intent. While the FBI worked, Evelyn and Sarah filed the civil lawsuit. Vance v. the City of Willow Creek, Miller and Brody. The filing didn't just ask for damages, it demanded a federal consent decree to oversee the department's hiring and training practices. The press conference was held on the steps of the federal courthouse. Evelyn stood at the podium, her wrist still in a brace. She didn't look like a victim. She looked like a force of nature. Last week, Evelyn began the cameras clicking furiously. I was reminded that no amount of education, no title, and no adherence to the law can protect a black woman from the presumption of guilt in this country. Officer Miller did not see a judge. He did not see a homeowner. He saw a target. The video was released to the public simultaneously. It went viral within the hour. The phrase, "people like you," trended globally. The visual of a young white officer manhandling a distinguished older black woman on her own porch was visceral. It shattered the arguments of compliance. She had complied. It didn't matter. The police union tried to fight back. Their spokesperson went on TV claiming the video was out of context, that Miller was in fear for his life, that the neighborhood was a high-crime area. A blatant lie, as Willow Creek had the lowest crime rate in the county. But then came the depositions. Officer Miller sat across the table from Sarah Jenkins. He looked smaller without his uniform, wearing an ill-fitting suit. He seemed annoyed to be there. Officer Miller, Sarah asked, what specific behavior did Judge Vance exhibit that led you to believe a burglary was in progress? She looked out of place, Miller mumbled. Out of place in what way? She was fumbling with the lock, looking around nervously. We have the video, officer, Sarah said, sliding a tablet across the table. She walks up the path, retrieves her keys, and inserts them. She looks at your car when you arrive. Is looking at a police car a crime? No. You stated in your report, which we now know was falsified, that she reached for a weapon. Where in the video does she do that? I thought she was reaching. You thought? Or you hoped? Sarah pressed. We have your text messages, officer. Should have tased her just to watch her drop. Explain to me how that statement aligns with your oath to protect and serve. Miller turned bright red. He looked at his lawyer, who signaled him to remain silent. He pleaded the fifth. Sergeant Brody fared no better. Faced with the text messages proving he instructed Miller to falsify a report, he crumbled. He tried to blame the culture of the department, tried to say he was just protecting his guy. Protecting him from the consequences of violating the Constitution, Sarah asked. Is that the job of a sergeant? The city saw the writing on the wall. The public pressure was suffocating. Protesters were camped out on the lawn of the police station. The mayor was receiving calls from senators. The Department of Justice was threatening to pull federal funding. 3 weeks before the trial was set to begin, the city capitulated. They offered a settlement of $12 million. But Evelyn wasn't done. I will accept the settlement, Evelyn told the city attorney in a closed-door meeting, on 3 conditions. 1, Miller and Brody are fired immediately and stripped of their pensions. 2, the department implements the Vance Protocol, a mandatory citizen-reviewed checklist for any stop involving a homeowner on their own property. 3, an independent civilian oversight board is established with subpoena power. The city attorney looked at the mayor. The mayor nodded weakly. Done. But the justice system wasn't finished with Miller and Brody. The FBI investigation concluded that their actions constituted a federal crime, deprivation of rights under color of law. Miller was indicted on federal civil rights charges. The jury was not sympathetic to a man who joked about tasing grandmothers. He was convicted and sentenced to 4 years in federal prison. Sergeant Brody, attempting to save himself, cut a deal. He testified against the chief of police, revealing a decade-long scheme of burying excessive force complaints to keep crime stats looking clean. Brody served 18 months, but his testimony brought down the entire command staff of the department. Evelyn donated the entire $12 million settlement to the Legal Defense Fund and a scholarship program for minority law students. 6 months later, Judge Evelyn Vance returned to the bench. The courtroom was packed. As she walked in, the bailiff cried out, "All rise," and they rose. But the energy was different. The defense attorneys, the prosecutors, the defendants, they looked at her differently. They didn't just see the iron gavel anymore. They saw a woman who had walked through the fire and burned down the house of corruption that tried to consume her. Evelyn sat in her high-backed leather chair. She adjusted her robes. She looked out at the sea of faces. She spotted a young, nervous public defender in the back, a black woman who reminded her of herself 30 years ago. Evelyn gave her a barely perceptible nod. She picked up her gavel. It felt heavier now, weighted with the knowledge of what it meant to be on the other side of the law's jagged edge. "We are on the record," Judge Vance said, her voice steady and clear. The lesson that echoed through Willow Creek, and indeed through the nation, was not just about the dangers of racism. It was about the fragility of freedom. It taught that titles, wealth, and status are paper shields against the sword of prejudice. It revealed that the only thing separating a respected judge from a suspect in the eyes of a biased system is the whim of a man with a badge. But more importantly, it taught that when power is abused, it must be met not with silence, but with the unrelenting, methodical application of the truth. Evelyn Vance proved that while the system may be broken, it is not invincible, especially when the person fighting it knows exactly how the gears turn. Miller and Brody thought they were the law. Evelyn Vance showed them that the law is not a weapon for the petty, it is a fortress for the just. And when you try to breach that fortress, you had better make sure the person guarding the gate isn't holding the keys to your destruction.
This concludes today's report. To access more official footage, please like and subscribe. Thank you for choosing Bodycam Incident Reports.